She was abandoned by her rich husband at the altar, but the gardener proposed to her. The musician stopped playing first, not all at once. It was a chord that went out of tune mid-phrase, a note suspended in the air that never found its end. Then came the silence, and in the silence came the whispers. Chloe had been waiting for almost 30 minutes. The more time passed, the more she felt that thing you feel when the answer that was already living inside you starts rising to the surface. The bouquet in her hands no longer trembled as much as before. It was as if her body itself had given up on keeping hope moving. She still insisted on a smile. The kind of smile you put on your face when you want to believe in something your heart has already started to doubt. The cell phones around her began to vibrate almost at the same time. One, then another, then another. She didn't need to ask anything. She saw it in their expressions. Sterling had sent a message to his sister, not to her, to his sister, saying he couldn't go through with it, that he needed time, that he was sorry. I had to stop for a second when I first read that. It's not the abandonment itself that hurts the most. It's the channel. He chose to tell his sister, as if Chloe were a detail someone else needed to handle for him. The maid of honor, Brooke, approached slowly, with the expression of someone who had to say something that couldn't help but hurt. She knelt on the grass in front of Chloe and held her hands before speaking. "He's not coming," Brooke said softly, and Chloe closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, the tears hadn't arrived yet, only that look of someone who has just had a certainty that had been hiding inside her for a long time. "I know," she replied. "I think I already knew. Because there are things you know before you know. There are signs you learn to ignore because loving is also a choice to look only one way." Chloe was 29 when the accident happened. She was a dance teacher, a good one, the kind who doesn't live from technique, but from what dance does to people on the inside. The wheelchair had entered her life after an accident on an ordinary afternoon, the kind you never imagine will change everything. And she had learned, little by little, that the chair didn't erase who she was. It just changed the way she moved through the world. She met Sterling 8 months after the accident, at a time when she was still learning to rediscover her own body. He arrived like a surprise, well-spoken, generous with his gestures, always having the right word when it was needed. Son of a wealthy family in a coastal town where everyone knew each other and where the last name opened doors. He asked her to be his girlfriend over dinner, brought flowers the next day, called in the middle of the night just to ask if she was okay, and she let herself go along with it. Because when life has already taken such a sharp turn, when you've already faced what seemed insurmountable, the feeling of being wanted again arrives with a different strength. It arrives as proof that you still deserve it. But there are things you can only see from a distance. Mrs. Martha, Chloe's mother, was 67 and had the kind of wisdom that only comes from having lived a lot and observed even more. From the start, she hadn't said anything openly against Sterling. But there was a caution in her eyes that Chloe knew well, an unasked question that lingered there for months. "Mum, you never liked him," Chloe said once, weeks before the wedding. Mrs. Martha took a long time to answer. "I like whoever makes my daughter happy. I'm just not sure he knows what that really means." At the time, Chloe thought it was just motherly overprotectiveness. Now, sitting in that decorated garden, with the white veil yielding to the wind and the guests not knowing where to look, she understood better what her mother meant. In the months leading up to the wedding, there were signs she chose not to see. Sterling's family never wanted a picture with her. There was always a reason, a commitment, a hurried exit. At one of their parties, she overheard Sterling's mother talking to an aunt about how he had always been so kind. He cares about everyone. That's just how he is. As if the relationship were a charity work. As if Chloe were someone who needed to be looked after, not someone he loved. She swallowed it. She smiled. She believed that love could change things around her. And then came the message to her sister, on the wedding day, 30 minutes after the scheduled time. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a thumbs up and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Mrs. Martha was the second to stand up after Brooke. She walked slowly to her daughter, bent down and without saying a word simply took her hand and stayed there. Sometimes that's what a mother can do, not fix things, just be there. The guests began to murmur among themselves. Some looked on with pity, others with that curiosity people swear they don't have but do. A cousin of Sterling's grabbed her purse and left without saying goodbye. Two of his co-workers stared at their own shoes. That was when Caleb appeared. He wasn't part of the plans that afternoon. He was the gardener at Cedar Creek Estate where the wedding was taking place, a family property, owned by an older gentleman in town, rented out for events on weekends. Caleb had taken care of the place for 4 years, knew every flower bed, every tree, knew when each flower bloomed. That day, he had stayed in the background the whole time. While the event crew set up tables and arrangements, he was on the other side of the grounds, trimming a hedge near the entrance, wearing his green work shirt and faded denim work pants, his hands marked by routine. Chloe knew him. During the 4 months of wedding preparations, she had come to Cedar Creek Estate at least 6 times, for meetings with the wedding planner, to choose arrangements, to map out the path she would walk to the altar. And Caleb was there for every one of them, always with that silent presence of someone who doesn't need to assert himself to be noticed. On the first visit, she had gotten stuck in a part of the lawn where the wheelchair wheels sank into the soft ground after a rain. He noticed before anyone else, dropped what he was doing and came to help without making a fuss. He pushed slowly until they reached firm ground and said simply, "This section gets tricky after rain. Next time better go by the right side. The ground is more compacted." She said, "Thank you." He nodded and went back to work. On the third visit, when she arrived earlier than expected and was waiting for the wedding planner under a tree, it was Caleb who brought a glass of water without being asked and said, "It's hot today. You must be tired from planning so much." And they talked for about 20 minutes, about the garden, about the history of Cedar Creek Estate, about how he had come to that job. She talked about dance, not as a past left behind, but as something she still carried inside her in other forms. He listened in a way few people listen, without haste, without that expression of someone already formulating a reply while you're still in the middle of a sentence. When Sterling showed up for visits, he rarely looked at Caleb. He was the type to organize the world in layers, and the gardener fell into a layer he didn't need to see. Chloe never forgot that, and now, in that garden that Caleb had prepared with such care, the paths clean, the flowers in the arrangements, the grass trimmed just right, it was him she saw walking toward her. He was holding a red rose in his hand. A single rose, the kind that grew near the entrance, one he had cultivated himself. The guests who were still there fell into a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of waiting. It was the silence of people witnessing something they didn't yet understand, but already sensed was important. Caleb stopped a few steps from Chloe. He looked at her with that calm she had learned to recognize in him, not indifference, not distance, but the calm of someone fully present where they are. "I don't have the right to do what I'm about to do now," he said, "and if you want me to leave, I will. But I had to try." He lowered himself to one knee on the grass, his jeans still bearing the dirt stains from the day's work, and held out the rose to her. "Chloe, I know you came here today to marry someone else. I know the situation is way too heavy, but I needed you to know that there's someone who sees you, who has always seen you, not in spite of anything, just you, exactly as you are." She put her hand over her mouth. The tears that hadn't come before arrived now, in a way she couldn't hold back. Behind them, Brooke covered her own mouth with her hands. One of the older ladies in the last row started crying softly. Mrs. Martha stayed very quiet, her eyes shining, with an expression that was almost relief, as if something she had been waiting for a long time had finally arrived, even if through the wrong door. "I don't know about you, but that moment got me in a way I didn't expect. There's a very specific kind of courage in offering yourself, when the timing couldn't be worse. Maybe that's exactly the right time." Chloe looked at the rose for a long second. Then she looked at Caleb. "You're doing this now," she said, and there was a sob in the middle of the sentence, but also the beginning of a smile. "Now, like this?" "I tried to find a better way," he answered, serious. "I didn't." She took the rose. For that moment, that was all. Her with the rose in her hand, him still on one knee in the grass, and the entire garden frozen around them. But the story didn't end there. In fact, that's where it got more complicated. In the days that followed, as the dust from the wedding that never happened began to settle, Chloe had to face things she had put off for a long time. Sterling sent a message 2 days later. A long one, the kind you know was written and rewritten several times, full of sentences that tried to explain without really explaining. He said he loved her, but the pressure from his family had been too much. That his mother had cried, that his father had threatened to cut ties with him, that he had tried to hold on but reached a point where he couldn't anymore, that he was sorry, that he hoped one day she would understand. Chloe read the message 3 times. The first time she felt anger. The second time she felt a different kind of sadness, not for herself, but for him. The third time she closed her phone and went to have coffee with her mother. "What are you going to reply?" Mrs. Martha asked, holding her cup. "Nothing," Chloe said. "There's nothing to say." Mrs. Martha nodded. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. What came next was harder than the wedding day itself, because the sharp pain of an event fades with time, but the pain that lingers is the one of rebuilding. Chloe had to cancel the catering company, the honeymoon, the move to the apartment that would have been theirs. She had to call people and explain what happened, listen to the "oh, that's awful," the "you'll get through this," the uncomfortable silences of those who don't know what to say. And there was that other thing, smaller, but no less heavy. People were curious about Caleb, about what had happened in the garden. The neighbor in her apartment building somehow already knew. Brooke texted every week wanting updates. But Chloe hadn't spoken to Caleb, and Caleb hadn't reached out. She kept thinking about that. In the gesture itself, whether he had acted out of pity, on a whim of the moment, or something he couldn't even name himself. She didn't want to be the object of a nice gesture with no substance. She had once been treated like a character in someone else's story. She didn't want that again. So 3 weeks after the wedding that didn't happen, she went back to Cedar Creek Estate. She didn't warn anyone. She just went. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The place was empty of events. She entered through the side gate and followed the compacted dirt path that Caleb had pointed out on her very first visit. He was at the back of the garden, transplanting seedlings from one bed to another with that care of someone who respects what they're doing. He looked up when he heard the chair approaching. He stood, wiped his hands on his pants. Chloe. Caleb. There was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that exists between people who don't need to pretend they're not nervous. "Why did you do that?" she asked directly. He didn't look away. "Because if I hadn't, I'd spend the rest of my life knowing I was a coward at a moment that mattered. And if I had gotten angry or told you to leave in front of everyone." "That would have been your right," he said, "but at least I would have tried." Chloe took a deep breath. "You don't feel sorry for me, do you?" "Because I don't need that." He was quiet for a moment, not the kind of quiet of someone formulating a lie, but of someone being honest with themselves before speaking. "No," he said, "it was never pity. In the times we talked, you seemed like one of the most whole people I've ever met. Whole doesn't mean perfect. It means someone who doesn't hide from who they are." She looked at him for a long time. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a thumbs up, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. "I need you to know," she said slowly, "that I'm not ready for anything right now. I need time to understand what I feel, to get back on my feet, so to speak." The corner of his mouth turned up slightly. "I know how to wait. It's part of the job." She laughed. A real laugh that came from her chest before she could hold it back. And it was with that laugh that something began. In the months that followed, it was slow. It was the only way it could be. They started meeting more often. She would return to Cedar Creek Estate on weekday afternoons, sometimes with Mrs. Martha, who had developed a sudden fascination with plants that Chloe suspected was less botanical and more strategic. One afternoon, her mother spent 40 minutes asking Caleb about the life cycle of a specific rose bush with a seriousness that fooled no one. Chloe pretended she wasn't laughing. Caleb was the same as always, present, direct, no beating around the bush, but no brutality either. He spoke when he had something to say, and was quiet when he didn't. And Chloe learned that this wasn't coldness. It was respect. He also had his own life with a past he didn't hide but didn't spill all at once. A relationship that had ended badly years ago. A phase where he had lost himself a bit. A slow and quiet rebuilding, done with work and hands in the earth. Literally. He didn't ask her to understand everything right away. He just showed her gradually as she asked. Chloe, for her part, started doing something she had put aside after the accident. She went back to teaching dance, not standing up, not the way it was before, but sitting down with adapted movements. She began teaching young children at a community dance school. The children didn't even ask about the chair. To them, she was just Teacher Chloe, the one who made her arms tell stories. Mrs. Martha went to the first class and cried from start to finish, hidden in a corner. Afterwards, she said she hadn't cried at all. It was an allergy. Chloe let it slide. There was still one thing she had avoided for months, the conversation with Sterling's family. His mother had tried to reach out once, not to apologize, but to explain that things had been hard for everyone. Chloe didn't respond. Brooke, who was more direct by nature, said silence was the right answer, and that silence is also a form of speech. But one day, on an afternoon that wasn't planned, Chloe ran into Sterling at the grocery store. They both stopped. Between them was that strangeness you feel when you look at someone who was once central to your life and realize they no longer hold that place. Sterling looked different, quieter, thinner. He said, "Hi," with a voice that didn't know what came next. Chloe said hi back. And then, without planning, she said, "I hope you find a way to be more honest with yourself, truly." It wasn't anger. It was more like exhaustion, the good kind, the one that comes after you put down a weight you've carried for too long. Sterling didn't answer. She didn't wait. When she got to the parking lot, she stood still for a moment looking at the sky. And she realized she was okay. Not perfect, not without scars, but okay. That encounter she had dreaded for months had lasted 30 seconds and hadn't destroyed a thing. Life has a way of being smaller than our fear. 6 months after that garden, 6 months after the red rose and the knee on the ground, Caleb and Chloe went together to a mutual friend's birthday party. The first time they went out as a public couple, in front of other people. Chloe wore a dark blue dress, her hair pinned to one side, with that posture she had learned to have over the years, not of someone who asks permission to exist, but of someone who simply exists, period. Caleb stayed by her side the whole party, not glued to her, not anxious, just present. When she wanted to talk to someone, he mingled. When she needed him nearby, he was there. Between them was a harmony that didn't need much to work. In a group conversation, a woman who didn't know them well asked Chloe how the two had met. Chloe exchanged a quick glance with Caleb. "It was in a garden," she said, "on a day when things went wrong in the right way." The woman smiled without quite understanding. She didn't need to. When it was time to leave, Caleb pushed her chair over the uneven cobblestones of the street. She said, "Go left, this stretch is firmer." And they both laughed, because it was exactly the same direction he had given her the first time they met, only with the roles reversed. Sometimes stories fold back on themselves like that, and in that fold, there's a beauty no one planned. Mrs. Martha, when she heard how that outing went, was silent for a moment, cup in hand, with the look of someone piecing something together. Then she simply said, "Good. That was the path all along." As if she had known from the start. Maybe she did. End of the story. I always wonder what makes a person like Caleb do what he did in that garden. It wasn't movie courage. It was that quiet courage of someone who doesn't want to reach the end of their life carrying an unanswered question. And Chloe, who had learned to pick herself back up once, had to learn again, only this time with someone by her side who understood what it meant to rebuild slowly. Tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. Do you believe that certain things need to fall so that others can rise in the right place? Leave it in the comments. I read each one carefully. Don't forget the thumbs up and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories like this one. Thank you so much for your company.